Imagine trying to execute like a hostile corporate takeover while surviving a patriarchal dystopia.
Right.
And navigating a crippling theological crisis, all while being a penniless, undocumented immigrant.
It is a staggering scenario.
It really is, because usually when we study ancient history, there's this expectation of grand scale, you know?
Oh, absolutely. The massive empires.
Yeah, you open a textbook and it shows these huge empires colliding, armies marching, kings conquering, and the historian just points and says, there's the turning point.
Right. That's where history changed.
Exactly. But today, we're looking at a text that completely shatters that epic movie camera.
It really does, because it forces us to look away from the monuments and the kings. And instead, we have to look at the dirt, at the absolute margins of society.
Yep.
We're stripping away the macro-level history to look at a historical landscape that is, well, terrifyingly intimate and chaotic.
Right, because we are stepping into the world of ancient Israel during the era of the Judges.
Yes. A very dark time.
And you really don't need a degree in ancient Near Eastern history to understand what kind of era this was, because the texts from that period sum it up with one incredibly ominous tagline.
That famous tagline.
Yeah. It says, "In those days there was no king in Israel. Everyone did what was right in his own eyes."
Which is, I mean, the absolute definition of a societal collapse.
Anarchy.
Total anarchy. When everyone does what is right in their own eyes, it means there is no central authority, no functioning justice system, no police force, no social safety net.
Just people fending for themselves.
Exactly. It's a time of deep moral, spiritual, and political decay. You have bloody civil conflicts and widespread religious apostasy.
It's not a fairy tale at all.
No, this isn't a sanitized story. It's a world where the social fabric has completely unraveled.
We're talking about an era defined by warlords and vigilantes. Figures like Samson, who, acts more like a violent mercenary than a leader.
Right. Or Jephthah.
Yes. A man who makes a rash vow that ends in the sacrifice of his own daughter. It is deeply dark.
It's a deeply selfish time.
And if you are listening to this right now, and you've ever felt overwhelmed by a chaotic world, like if you look at the news and think, what on earth is happening?
Which we all do.
Right. If you wonder if anything you do actually matters, then this deep dive is for you.
It really is the perfect text for that feeling.
Because today, our mission is to dive into an ancient 4-chapter novella called The Book of Ruth. And we are going to uncover how this seemingly simple story serves as a masterclass in ancient legal strategy.
And a profound theology of suffering.
Yes, and the invisible architecture of divine providence.
And against that dystopian backdrop you just described, the genius of this text is how hard it pivots.
How so?
Well, instead of focusing on those violent, larger-than-life figures, it zeroes in on the absolute margins, ordinary, deeply vulnerable people.
The people usually left out of the history books.
Exactly. An impoverished Israelite widow, a destitute foreign daughter-in-law, and a local farmer.
Just 3 ordinary people.
Right. And the narrative demonstrates how supreme divine sovereignty and gritty human responsibility work together. They transform profound emptiness into extraordinary fullness.
But to understand the magnitude of that fullness, we have to start at the absolute bottom, the nadir of human existence.
Yes, the emptiness.
And it begins with a really heavy dose of dark irony.
Yeah.
Paint the picture for us. How does this story actually open?
So it opens with a geographical and nominal irony that an ancient reader would have caught immediately. A famine strikes a town called Bethlehem.
Okay, and why is that ironic?
Because in Hebrew, Bethlehem translates literally to house of bread.
Oh, wow. So the house of bread is completely empty. There's a famine in the one place guaranteed by its name to have food.
Exactly. The irony is sharp. And then we meet the family at the center of this crisis. We meet a man named Elimelech.
His name means something too, right?
Yes, his name means my God is king.
Okay, so a guy whose name declares God is king.
Right. But what does this man do? Faced with the famine in the house of bread, a man whose very name declares the absolute sovereignty of God decides he can't trust God to provide.
Wow.
He abandons his ancestral homeland, the promised land, out of sheer faithless pragmatism.
He packs up his wife, Naomi, and his 2 sons, and just moves to Moab, which, just to be clear, isn't just the next town over.
No, not at all.
Moab is hostile territory. They are Israel's perennial enemies.
Right. It's a tragic contradiction, and the tragedy only compounds from there. In Moab, Elimelech dies,
leaving Naomi a widow in a foreign land.
Yes. But even before that, the author layers in this incredible almost dark foreshadowing with the names of Elimelech's two sons.
Oh, right, the sons.
He names them Mahlon and Chilion. In Hebrew, Mahlon means sickly or disease, and Chilion means frail or wasting away.
Okay, wait, I have to ask about this. Who names their kids sickly and frail?
It's a great question.
I mean, is the author doing this on purpose? Because it feels like if I named my kids doomed in disaster, I can't be surprised when things go wrong.
Right.
Is this a kind of dark comedy meant to critique the characters?
That is exactly how many literary scholars read it. It functions as a sharp, almost satirical critique of the era of the Judges.
So it's intentional.
Very much so. The author is signaling to the reader right away that this family's pragmatism is doomed.
You can't outsmart God.
Exactly. You cannot abandon the promised land, move into enemy territory to save your life, and expect it to go well when you are fundamentally walking away from your covenant.
Right.
The text is showing the ultimate futility of doing what is right in your own eyes.
It's like someone leaving a well-stocked, secure bunker during a storm just because the power flickered for a second, only to walk directly into a Category 5 hurricane.
That is a very apt way to look at it, because in Moab, sickly and frail grow up and marry Moabite women, Ruth and Orpah.
Right.
And then staying incredibly true to their names, they both die.
Which leaves Naomi utterly bereft. And I think we really need to pause here. We have to strip away our modern safety nets to understand the severe socioeconomic reality of her situation.
Oh, absolutely. She doesn't just lose her family.
Right. She loses her entire identity and security.
Yes. In the patriarchal society of the ancient Near East, a woman's physical and economic security, her legal standing, her societal identity was almost entirely tethered to the men in her life.
Her father, husband, or sons.
Exactly. And Naomi has lost all of them. She is past childbearing age. She has no male heirs to carry on the family name or work the land back in Israel.
And she has no property she can easily leverage.
None. And she's living as an alien in a foreign land. She isn't just sad, she is uniquely vulnerable to starvation, exploitation, and complete erasure.
She is at ground zero of societal marginalization.
Ground zero.
Yes. Now, before we get into how Naomi and Ruth try to survive this, I want to pivot to a fascinating historical debate.
Ah, the authorship debate.
Yeah, because knowing who wrote this story and when they wrote it, it completely changes how we read Naomi and Ruth's actions. What is the debate around the authorship here?
It's one of the most interesting debates in biblical scholarship. And it's important to note that we're looking at this from an analytical perspective.
Right, so examining the historical and linguistic arguments.
Exactly. The debate fundamentally revolves around whether the book was written very early in Israel's history or hundreds of years later.
Okay, let's unpack the early theory first.
So the ancient rabbinic tradition, specifically found in the Babylonian Talmud, a tractate called Baba Bathra 14b, attributes the writing of the book to the prophet Samuel.
And if Samuel wrote it, when does that place it?
That places its composition early in the monarchic period, right around the time King David comes to the throne.
Okay, but why would Samuel, or anyone in David's court, need to write a book about a random Moabite widow from generations ago?
Because of David's political liabilities. The Book of Ruth ends with a genealogy showing that Ruth is King David's great-grandmother.
Oh, wow.
And in ancient Israelite culture, lineage was everything. It dictated your right to the land, to the priesthood, and certainly your right to the throne.
And having a Moabite great-grandmother was a problem.
A massive political problem. Moabites were despised. So under this theory, the book serves as a political and theological apology for King David.
Ah, so it's PR. It's a campaign document.
Exactly.
His political enemies are probably whispering, you can't trust David. He's got dirty Moabite blood. And this book says, actually, look at how incredibly righteous and faithful his Moabite great-grandmother was.
Right. God clearly sanctioned this lineage. It legitimizes his kinship by showing that his foreign ancestry was rooted in extraordinary virtue, not scandal.
That makes a lot of sense. But there's another theory.
Yes. You have a large contingent of modern scholars who propose a very different theory. They argue for a much later post-exilic date, around the 4th or 5th century BCE.
So hundreds of years after David, this is the time of Ezra and Nehemiah, right? When the Israelites are returning to Jerusalem after being exiled in Babylon.
Yes. And the political climate during Ezra and Nehemiah's time was highly volatile. It was intensely focused on strict ethnic purity.
Because they were trying to rebuild their identity.
Right. The returning exiles were fragile. Ezra and Nehemiah were strictly enforcing endogamic marriage practices, meaning you could only marry within the tribe.
I remember reading they were actually commanding Jewish men who had married foreign women during the exile to divorce them.
Yes. Systematically divorce their wives and send them and their children away.
I mean, that sounds incredibly harsh.
It was a brutal, draconian measure aimed at preserving national identity. So if the Book of Ruth was written during that specific time, it completely changes the book's function.
Also.
It becomes a brilliant, subversive polemic.
Oh, I see. If Ezra is standing in the town square yelling, "Divorce your foreign wives, they will corrupt you," someone quietly publishes the Book of Ruth.
Exactly.
And the book essentially says, hold on, our greatest king, King David, only exists because a faithful foreign woman was virtuously integrated into our community.
Right. It completely undermines the strict xenophobic policies of the day. It argues that faith and covenant loyalty matter way more than ethnic bloodlines.
That is such a powerful protest.
It is, and historians debate the linguistic markers in the text to figure out which era it actually belongs to. Some scholars look at the Hebrew and say it contains late biblical Hebrew.
Words that only show up later.
Right. Words and grammatical structures that only show up after the Babylonian exile, suggesting the later date. But others argue those are just regional dialects from earlier times.
It's fascinating how the exact same story can act as either a royal defense attorney's brief or a subversive protest novel, just depending on when it was dropped into history.
It really is. But regardless of when it was written, the way the story is actually constructed is undeniably brilliant.
You mean the structure of it?
Yes. The author uses a very specific architectural framework for the narrative. It is a masterpiece of symmetry. The author employs a classic chiastic structure.
Okay, let's unpack this. Break that down for us. What is a chiasm?
A chiasm is an ancient literary device. A sequence of ideas or events is presented, and then the exact same sequence is repeated, but in reverse order.
Like a mirror.
Like a mirror, exactly. It draws your attention to the absolute center of the text. Think of it like a staircase going down into a basement, hitting the floor, and then taking the exact same steps back up.
So it moves from A to B to C and then back out C, B, A.
Correct. The Book of Ruth is perfectly engineered this way. It moves from profound emptiness to abundant fullness.
Walk us through the steps.
It starts with A, the famine and exile in Moab, marked by death and barrenness. Then it moves inward to B, the journey and the making of covenants.
Okay.
It hits C, the arrival in Bethlehem and absolute bitterness. And then it hits the exact midpoint of the chiasm, the pivot of the whole story.
Which is what?
The midnight encounter at the threshing floor. That is the center.
And then it walks back up the stairs.
Right. From there, the narrative mirrors itself outward. It moves back to C prime, the legal maneuvering to secure a future, back to B prime, the marriage
And
covenant.
finally out to A prime.
Yes. Fullness and lineage, ending with the birth of a child, the restoration of the family tree, and a full harvest. The structure itself preaches the message, what is empty will be filled.
It is a beautifully engineered story. So let's step into that structure. We're at the bottom of the stairs. Naomi is completely emptied out.
Utterly empty.
Her husband is dead. Her sons are dead. She decides she's going to walk back to Bethlehem to beg for food. And she tells her two Moabite daughters-in-law, Ruth and Orpah, to stay in Moab.
Go back to your mothers, find new husbands.
Right. And logically, Orpah realizes Naomi is right. There is no future for her in Israel. So she kisses Naomi goodbye and turns back. But Ruth doesn't.
No, she stays.
Why does Ruth stay?
That decision is the engine of the entire narrative, and it revolves around a single, virtually untranslatable Hebrew word.
Look a word.
The word is Hesed.
Hesed. Okay, unpack that. Why is it untranslatable?
It is the theological and ethical epicenter of the book. It's found roughly 250 times in the Old Testament, and translators constantly wrestle with how to render it in English.
What do they usually go with?
You'll see it translated as loving kindness, covenant loyalty, mercy, or steadfast love, but none of those English words quite capture the full heavy weight of the concept.
Because it's not just an emotion, right? It's not just feeling bad for someone.
Exactly. Hesed is not just a feeling of affection or general niceness. It is a fierce, unwavering commitment that goes far beyond the baseline requirements of duty or law.
It's an action.
Yes. It specifically manifests as a tangible action designed to rescue someone who is in desperate need. And crucially, it is freely given with absolutely no expectation of return.
So the person giving it doesn't need anything back.
Right. The person giving Hesed has all the power. The person receiving it is powerless.
It sounds like the difference between someone offering hollow thoughts and prayers when you're going through a crisis
Yes.
versus someone showing up to your house unannounced with a hot casserole, a mop, and a check to pay your rent for the month.
That is a brilliant analogy.
One is a sentiment, the other is costly physical intervention.
Costly intervention, exactly. And the narrative strategically places 3 explicit occurrences of this word throughout the text, at the beginning, the middle, and the end.
Okay, let's walk through them. The first one is in chapter 1, right as Naomi is trying to send the girls away.
Yes. In Ruth 1.8, Naomi actually prays that Yahweh will show hesed to her daughters-in-law as they go back home, because they had been kind to her dead sons.
She is asking God to rescue them.
But Ruth essentially intercepts that prayer. She responds with one of the most famous and beautiful declarations in all of literature.
Ruth 1.16 and 17.
Right. Ruth vows to adopt Naomi's God and Naomi's people. She says, where you go, I will go, and where you lodge, I will lodge. Your people shall be my people, and your God, my God.
Where you die, I will die, and there will I be buried.
Yeah.
It's incredibly poetic, but practically speaking, it's financial and social suicide.
Absolutely.
I mean, she is renouncing her own national identity, her familial security in Moab, and any realistic prospect of ever getting married again. Who in Israel is going to marry a penniless Moabite widow?
No one. She is binding herself to an impoverished, embittered older woman who has nothing to offer her.
She gives up everything.
She does. And what makes this so profound is that Ruth acts as an Old Testament Samaritan.
Like the parable.
Think about the parable of the Good Samaritan in the New Testament. The hero is the despised foreigner. Here, Ruth is the despised foreigner.
He's a Moabite.
From a nation born of incest and hostility toward Israel, yet she ironically ends up embodying the highest ethical ideal of the Israelite covenant hesed better than any of the native Israelites living during the era of the Judges.
She is a living, breathing counter-testimony to a culture where everyone is just looking out for themselves.
Precisely.
So if the laws are stacked against them and the famine is practically killing them, how do they actually survive Tuesday? Who makes the first move once they get to Bethlehem?
That leads us right into the second occurrence of the word hesed. Once they arrive, they are starving. So Ruth volunteers to go into the fields to scavenge for food.
Right.
And this introduces us to the contagious nature of hesed.
Cheers.
Yes. Hesed creates a theological feedback loop in this story. Ruth's initial sacrificial loyalty to Naomi inspires Boaz.
He's the owner of the field she wanders into.
Right. It inspires him to act with his own hesed. And to understand what Boaz does, we have to look at the ancient welfare system of Israel, known as the Law of Peah, or gleaning.
How did gleaning actually work?
According to the Mosaic Law specifically, Leviticus 19 and Deuteronomy 24 landowners were strictly forbidden from harvesting the absolute edges of their fields.
Okay.
And if a sheaf of grain fell to the ground while they were bundling it, they were not allowed to go back and pick it up.
That leftover grain was the legal property of the poor, right?
Exactly. The poor, the widow, the orphan, and the resident alien. It was a social safety net built into the agricultural economy.
So it wasn't charity. It was the law. The poor had a right to walk behind the harvesters and pick up the scraps to survive.
Correct. But here is the reality of the Judges-era laws were rarely enforced.
Ah, so it was dangerous.
A young foreign widow walking into a field filled with male workers was in extreme physical danger. She could easily be harassed, assaulted, or chased off.
But she happens to walk into Boaz's field.
Yeah.
And Boaz doesn't just let her glean. He goes way beyond the legal requirement.
He shatters the bare minimum. When he finds out who she is, he sees her hesed toward Naomi, and he responds with extraordinary generosity.
What does he do?
He actively protects her. He orders his male workers not to touch her. He tells her not to go to any other field. He invites her to sit at his table and eat roasted grain with him.
Elevating her from a scavenger to an honored guest.
Exactly.
And the craziest part is what he tells his workers to do behind her back.
Right. He explicitly orders his harvesters to intentionally pull good stalks of grain out of the tied bundles and drop them on the ground for her to find.
He essentially rigs the harvest in her favor.
He operates according to the spirit of the law, the spirit of hesed, not just the letter. When Ruth comes home with a massive amount of food, Naomi is stunned. In Ruth 2.20, Naomi blesses Boaz, saying that he has not forsaken his hesed to the living and the dead.
Which sets up the final occurrence of the word later in the story, right?
Yes. In chapter 3, verse 10. This happens at the threshing floor, which is the midpoint of that chiasm we discussed.
Right.
Ruth approaches Boaz at night and asks him to redeem her and Naomi. Boaz is overwhelmed by this. He praises Ruth, saying this latest instance of her Hesed is greater than the first.
Why is it greater?
Because Boaz is an older man. He knows that Ruth, who is young, could have easily chased after younger, wealthier, more attractive men for her own personal comfort.
But she doesn't.
No, instead she seeks out Boaz specifically because he is a relative of her dead father-in-law, Elimelech.
She's choosing marriage to an older man specifically to act as a redeemer for Naomi's family line.
Exactly. She is continuously sacrificing her own potential ease for the restoration of someone else's legacy.
That is incredible. And, for the person listening to this right now on their commute or at the gym, I think it's worth pausing to consider the mechanics of your own relationships.
It's a great exercise.
Think about the people in your life. Who operates on a ledger of debts and favors? The people who say, I did this for you, so you owe me. Or, I'll only help you if there's an ROI.
We all know people like that.
Right. And then think about who in your life operates purely on this radical economy of Hesed. Because the text is arguing that this kind of radical, unreciprocated, costly loyalty is actually the very glue that holds a community together when the world is falling apart.
And, more profoundly, the text argues that this human loyalty is the exact vehicle used by God to steer human history.
Which brings us to the mechanics of divine providence. Human Hesed is powerful, but it doesn't operate in a vacuum.
Not at all.
This is a major theme because when we talk about God in the Old Testament, we are so used to the fireworks. If you read Exodus, you have the 10 plagues.
The parting of the Red Sea.
The pillar of fire, the booming voice from the mountain. But God is surprisingly, almost shockingly quiet in the Book of Ruth.
He is hidden behind the veil of the ordinary. The narrator only explicitly attributes direct, miraculous action to God twice in the entire 4 chapters.
Only twice.
Yes. In chapter 1, verse 6, the narrator says God visited his people to give them bread, ending the famine. And at the very end, in chapter 4, verse 13, it says God granted Ruth conception.
Wow.
The entirety of the narrative between those 2 bookends is driven by human decision-making, agricultural rhythms, and seemingly random circumstances.
And this brings us to one of my absolute favorite phrases in the whole text.
Yeah.
It's in chapter 2, verse 3. Ruth needs to find food, so she walks out of town.
Right.
And the standard English translation usually says something like, she happened to come to the part of the field belonging to Boaz. But the original Hebrew phrase is completely bizarre. It's wayyiqer miqreha.
Yes. Literally translated, wayyiqer miqreha means her hap happened or chance chanced upon her.
Chance chanced upon her. I love that. It sounds almost sarcastic.
It is a profound use of literary irony by the author. Linguists note that this is a highly unusual grammatical construction in the Hebrew Bible.
Drawing attention to it.
Exactly. The author is deliberately drawing massive attention to this exact moment.
Why?
Because he wants you to view the event from 2 different perspectives simultaneously. From Ruth's perspective, on the ground, she has no map. She has no GPS.
She doesn't know who Boaz is, and she doesn't know where his fields are.
Right. To her, it is pure survival, blind luck, and absolute coincidence. She just picks the direction and walks.
But to the reader.
To the reader, who is armed with the knowledge of God's overarching sovereignty, it's clear there is no such thing as random chance.
God's hidden hand orchestrates the mundane details. Of all the fields in all of Bethlehem, he guides her footsteps to the one exact field.
Owned by the one man who has both the legal standing to redeem her family and the moral character to actually want to do it.
It's the invisible architecture of the universe at work.
Exactly. And this intricate, beautiful relationship between human agency and divine providence is showcased in what is arguably the most brilliant piece of Hebrew wordplay in the entire book.
Okay, here's where it gets really interesting. Let's unpack this wordplay slowly, because when I first saw this, it completely blew my mind.
It centers around the Hebrew term kanap.
Kanap. What does the word actually mean?
Kanap is a flexible word. It can mean wing, like the wing of a bird, or it can mean the cloak, skirt, or garment of a piece of clothing.
Okay, so wing or cloak.
Right. In chapter 2, when Boaz first meets Ruth and is feeding her, he is deeply moved by her story. He prays a blessing over her.
He's being very spiritual.
Yes. He says, "May the Lord, the God of Israel, reward you fully, under whose wings," and the word he uses there is kanap, "you have come for refuge."
Okay, so Boaz is using kanap metaphorically. He is offering a beautiful theological platitude.
Exactly.
He's essentially saying, may God, like a giant mother bird, protect you under his wings. It's a very safe, spiritual thing to say.
It's a lovely sentiment, but then the story moves forward to chapter 3. We are at the threshing floor. It is the middle of the night.
Right.
Boaz is asleep at the end of a pile of grain. Ruth sneaks in, uncovers his feet, and lies down. In the middle of the night, Boaz wakes up startled, shivering. He asks, "Who are you?"
And Ruth replies, "I am Ruth, your servant."
Uh-uh.
And then she makes her bold request. She tells him to redeem her.
But the exact phrasing she uses is incredible. She says, "Spread your cloak over your servant." And what word does she use for cloak?
Knowing a guess. She uses the exact same word, canap.
Yes.
Wait. So yesterday, Boaz says, "May God protect you under his wings, canap." And today, Ruth looks at him and says, "Spread your cloak, canap, over me."
She is holding a mirror up to his theology.
She is literally throwing his own prayer back in his face. Like Boaz is sitting around praying for God to feed the hungry, and Ruth turns to him, hands him a spatula, points to the kitchen and says, "Get to work."
Exactly. She forces him to become the physical, tangible answer to his own spiritual petition.
Doesn't this completely blow up the modern idea that trusting God just means sitting back, folding your hands, and waiting for miracles to fall out of the sky?
It shatters that idea entirely. What is so fascinating here is that the text defines a highly synergistic view of reality.
Providence demands human participation.
Yes. Providence is not an excuse for passivity. Boaz realizes in that midnight moment that his theological platitudes must be translated into tangible, costly action.
God establishes the grand steps, but humans must faithfully and sometimes riskily walk the path.
Well said.
Okay, so Ruth has forced Boaz's hand with the cloak. He realizes what he has to do. He agrees to act as her redeemer. But wanting to do the right thing and actually legally accomplishing it are two very different things in ancient Israel.
Very different.
Boaz now has to navigate a labyrinth of ancient Israelite jurisprudence to make this redemption a reality. The story shifts from the quiet intimacy of the threshing floor to an intense public courtroom drama at the city gate.
And to understand the absolute mastery of what Boaz does at the city gate, we have to look at the legal framework of his society.
So what does this all mean?
He is dealing with three intersecting, highly complex legal customs that are all operating simultaneously in the background.
Let's lay them out one by one, because this is where the genius of his strategy comes in. What is the first law?
First, you have the gleaning rights, which we've touched on, found in Leviticus 19 and Deuteronomy 24. This is the law of Pia.
The provision for the poor.
Right. It was the societal provision for the poor and the widow to gather leftover grain. Boaz had already exceeded this law, but it's the baseline reason Ruth is even in his field to begin with.
Right. It's the law of immediate daily survival. What is the second law?
Second, you have the law of land redemption, or gula, found in Leviticus 25.
Keeping the land in the family.
Exactly. The Israelites believed that the land actually belonged to God, and they were just tenants. The land was divided among the tribes and families.
So what happens if someone goes broke?
If an Israelite man fell into extreme poverty and had to sell his ancestral land to survive, his closest male relative, the goel, or Kinsman-Redeemer, was legally obligated to step in, pay the debt, and buy back the land.
And the purpose of that was to keep the estate within the family clan, to prevent permanent disenfranchisement and a class of landless peasants.
Exactly. It was a mechanism to keep wealth within the extended family. Then you have the third and most complicated law,
Which is?
levirate marriage, or yibum, found in Deuteronomy 25.
How does that work?
If an Israelite man died childless, leaving a widow, his surviving brother was legally obligated to marry the widow.
Yeah, the kids.
The first son born of that new union would not carry the biological father's name. Instead, he would legally carry the name of the deceased man, ensuring that the dead man's lineage wasn't blotted out of history.
And ensuring that his property remained in his name.
Yeah.
Okay, so you have gleaning for food, land redemption for property, and levirate marriage for legacy. But looking at Boaz's situation, I mean, none of these laws apply perfectly, do they? It's a complete legal mess.
It is incredibly complicated, which is why Boaz needs a brilliant strategy.
Oh.
First of all, Boaz is a relative of Elimelech, but he is not the immediate brother of Ruth's dead husband, Mahlon.
So strict levirate marriage doesn't technically apply to him. He isn't forced to marry her.
Furthermore, the land redemption laws technically did not require the redeemer to marry the widow. You could buy the land, keep the profit, and ignore the woman.
Which is awful, but legally permissible.
Right. And to make it even more complex, scholars studying ancient property laws point out that Naomi didn't actually hold the permanent title to Elimelech's land.
Oh, really?
Because she was a widow, she likely only held what is called usufruct rights.
Usufruct. Okay, translate that into a modern real estate analogy.
Think of it like a life estate. Naomi has the legal right to use the land, lease it out, and profit from the crops during her lifetime.
But you can't sell the deed.
No. She cannot permanently sell the underlying deed. When she dies, the land legally reverts back to her dead husband's closest male heir.
Okay, so Boaz has all these overlapping, messy legal nuances. He goes to the city gate. And for you listening, the city gate isn't just a physical door in a wall.
No, it was much more.
In the ancient world, the gate of the city was the agora. It was the courthouse, the stock exchange, and the town hall rolled into one. That's where the elders sat and judged cases.
Exactly.
So Boaz sits down at the gate, but there is a massive obstacle standing in his way.
Yes. There is a nearer kinsman. There is a man in town who is more closely related to Elimelech than Boaz is. Therefore, this man has the first right of refusal on redeeming the land.
And what's his name?
The Hebrew text famously refuses to honor this man with a name, referring to him as Ploni Almoni.
Which roughly translates to what?
Mr. So-and-so or John Doe.
Mr. So-and-so.
Okay.
So Boaz calls Mr. So-and-so over, gathers 10 elders as a jury, and presents the situation.
He says Naomi has come back, and she is selling the rights to Elimelech's land. As the closest relative, do you want to buy it?
And Mr. So-and-so doesn't hesitate. He greedily jumps on it. He says, I will redeem it.
He jumps on it because he is doing the financial math, and it is a highly profitable investment.
How so?
Look at it from his perspective. He assumes he is only buying the usufruct rights from Naomi. Naomi is an old woman past childbearing age.
Okay.
Mr. So-and-so figures he can buy the land cheap, let Naomi live out her remaining years, and when she dies, because there are no other heirs, that land will permanently fold into his own estate, enriching his own sons.
It's pure profit. But then Boaz drops his masterstroke. He waits for Mr. So-and-so to publicly commit to buying the land, then he springs a trap.
Boaz says, oh, by the way, on the day you buy the land from Naomi, you must also acquire Ruth, the Moabitess, the widow of the dead, in order to perpetuate the name of the dead in his inheritance.
And suddenly, the financial calculus for Mr. So-and-so is completely inverted. The trap snaps shut.
Boaz has legally bound the land redemption to the Levirate marriage.
So if Mr. So-and-so marries Ruth, who is young and capable of having children, and they have a son, that redeemed land won't belong to Mr. So-and-so anymore.
No, it will belong to the son, who is legally considered Mahlon's heir.
And on top of losing the land, Mr. So-and-so would have the financial burden of feeding and supporting both Ruth and Naomi out of his own pocket.
Exactly. He panics. He realizes he will spend his own money to buy land that will eventually belong to someone else's family line.
So he backs out.
He tells Boaz, I cannot redeem it for myself, lest I impair my own inheritance. Take my right of redemption yourself.
You know, I look at Boaz's tactic here, and it reminds me of a brilliant corporate lawyer deploying a poison pill strategy in a hostile takeover.
That's a great comparison.
Mr. So-and-so wants the asset. He wants the land, but he wants it without the human obligation. He operates on strict legal minimalism. What is the most I can get for the least amount of responsibility? But Boaz uses the exact same law, not as a shield for greed, but as an instrument for profound compassion.
It is the stark difference between obeying the letter of the law for self-enrichment and fulfilling the spirit of the law for the sake of Hesed.
And to finalize this transfer, Mr. So-and-so has to perform an ancient, slightly bizarre legal ceremony called chalitza.
Yes.
Explain the sandal removal, because if you just read it casually, it sounds insane. He takes off his shoe and hands it to Boaz.
In the ancient Near East, taking off your sandal and giving it to someone else was a formal, public way to transfer property rights.
Why a sandal?
Think about what a sandal represents. You put your foot on a piece of land to claim it, to walk it, to own it. By removing his sandal and handing it over, Mr. So-and-so is symbolically saying, I remove my footprint from this land. I surrender my right to walk on it as an owner.
But there's also an element of public shame here, right?
Yes, there is.
In the stricter Deuteronomy law, if a man refuses to marry his brother's widow, the widow is supposed to spit in his face and take his sandal. And his family is forever known as the House of the Unsandaled.
Exactly. It was a public forfeiture of honor. Mr. So-and-so chose his own wealth over the survival of a widow.
And it is supreme poetic justice that a man who was so obsessively concerned with preserving his own name and his own inheritance is entirely forgotten by history.
He is forever immortalized in the biblical text only as a generic placeholder, Mr. So-and-so, while Boaz's name echoes through millennia.
Yeah, it is a brilliant legal maneuver. But, we spent a lot of time analyzing the men maneuvering at the city gate. We were
Yeah.
talking about their legal strategies, their sandals, their land deals.
We have.
But we really need to pause and remember who orchestrated this entire situation from the shadows. Two marginalized women, and one of them, Ruth, technically wasn't even supposed to be allowed inside the borders of Israel.
This is a vital point to explore. We have to examine the profound ethnic tension that undergirds this whole narrative.
It's the Moabite issue.
Yes. Throughout the book, Ruth is repeatedly identified not just as Ruth, but as Ruth the Moabitess. That wasn't just a helpful geographical marker, it was a heavy, politically and spiritually loaded title.
Because the Moabites weren't just the neighbors down the road. They were the ultimate villains in Israel's historical memory.
Yes, their historical origins were deeply problematic for an Israelite reader. According to the book of Genesis, chapter 19, the Moabite nation originated from the incestuous encounter between Lot and his daughters.
After the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah.
Exactly. That alone cast a dark shadow over them. Beyond that, during the Exodus, the Moabites refused to give the Israelites food and water, and they hired the prophet Balaam to curse them. They were associated with military conflict and spiritual seduction.
And it wasn't just bad blood. It was written into the highest laws of the land. Deuteronomy chapter 23, verse 3 is unequivocal.
It is very strict.
It commands that no Ammonite or Moabite shall enter the assembly of the Lord. Even to the 10th generation, none of them shall enter the assembly of the Lord forever. It was a hard, unbreakable boundary.
Yes, it was.
So, how did Ruth get in? If the law is that strict, how is she allowed to glean in the fields, let alone marry a prominent Israelite leader?
To understand how ancient readers reconciled this, historians look to ancient rabbinic literature. The Talmud, specifically a tractate called Yevamot 76b, provides a very precise, fascinating halakhic loophole.
A loophole? What is it?
The rabbis argued that the biblical prohibition in Deuteronomy strictly applied to male Moabites, not females.
Wait, how do they justify that logically? The text just says Moabite.
They looked at the reason given for the ban. The rationale in Deuteronomy was that the Moabites were excluded because they failed to meet the Israelites with bread and water on their journey out of Egypt.
Okay.
The rabbis reasoned that ancient Near Eastern cultural norms dictated that women did not go out to the borders of the territory to greet advancing armies. That was the duty of the men.
Wow.
Since the women couldn't have greeted the army anyway, the sin of inhospitality was attributed solely to the men. Therefore, a female Moabite, upon sincere conversion to the God of Israel, was exempt from the ban.
That is an incredible piece of legal gymnastics to carve out a space for grace. But when we look at how scholars interpret Ruth's actions, it goes beyond just rabbinic loopholes.
Yes, modern literary and feminist scholars have spent decades analyzing the sheer audacity of what Ruth and Naomi pull off.
Tell us about that perspective.
Scholars like Phyllis Tribble and Catherine Dubs-Hakenfeld have profoundly shifted how we read this text. For a long time, traditional interpretations focused heavily on Boaz acting as the chivalrous savior.
Riding in to rescue the damsel.
Right. Or they focused entirely on the genealogy at the end, viewing the women merely as vessels to produce King David. But feminist hermeneutics reclaims this text as a profound testament to female agency, intelligence, and solidarity in a deeply patriarchal, often dangerous society.
Tribble points out that this is a story of women surviving and thriving in a world where every single lever of economic, legal, and social power is controlled by men.
They refuse to be passive victims waiting to starve. Look at the initiative Ruth takes in Chapter 2. She doesn't wait for food to be brought to her. She braves the harvest fields, which, as we discussed, was incredibly dangerous for an unprotected foreign woman.
And then look at Naomi in Chapter 3. She devises an unprecedented, legally dubious, and highly risky plan to secure their future.
Sending Ruth to the threshing floor.
Right.
Yeah.
But wait, I have to push back here. The scholars themselves note that sending Ruth to the threshing floor in the winter of the night bears striking, almost uncomfortable parallels to the illicit nighttime encounters of lost daughters in Genesis 19.
The very origin story of the Moabites.
Yes. Isn't Naomi's plan incredibly reckless? In trying to survive a patriarchal world, aren't they just playing a really dangerous game using patriarchal rules?
That is a brilliant question, and it's one the scholars wrestle with extensively. It was a desperate, calculated risk.
A huge risk.
A threshing floor at harvest time was basically a massive celebration. There was eating, drinking, and men sleeping outside to guard their grain. Sending a young woman there at midnight was fraught with extreme physical and reputational danger.
If she had been caught by anyone other than Boaz, she could have been ruined or worse,
Absolutely. So why do they do it?
because they have exhausted all other options.
Right. But the scholars argue that while it is risky, it is deeply subversive. When Ruth is at the threshing floor, she is not acting as a compliant pawn or an object of seduction.
When Boaz wakes up, she doesn't use her sexuality to manipulate him. She speaks to him with stunning clarity and authority.
When she commands Boaz to spread his cloak, she is actively directing the actions of a powerful patriarch.
She's telling him what his covenant duty is.
Hmm.
She's the marginalized foreigner, lecturing the powerful insider on how to obey the law of God.
Precisely. And Sigefeld notes that this female initiative is met not with patriarchal suppression or exploitation, but with male cooperation and deep admiration.
Boaz doesn't take advantage of her vulnerability in the dark. He praises her character. He calls her a woman of excellence.
So, while it parallels the Genesis 19 story of the Moabite origins, it is a redeemed parallel. The women navigate the oppressive, dangerous structures of their world, but they do so with intelligence, courage, and unyielding virtue. They rewrite the legacy of Moab.
It's an incredible testament to their strength. And, the story resolves beautifully. Boaz wins at the city gate. They get the land, they get the marriage, the community rejoices.
A happy ending.
But I think it's so important to remember that for the vast majority of the narrative, for months of grinding poverty, Naomi and Ruth didn't know how it was going to end.
They had no idea.
They were just surviving day-to-day trauma. And for you listening, if you were trying to apply this ancient text to your own life today, the text offers a profoundly mature, realistic pastoral theology of suffering.
It does. It provides a massive reality check. And it starts by doing something that a lot of modern religious spaces struggle to do. It validates the unfiltered expression of raw grief.
Yes. Think back to chapter 1, when Naomi first returns to Bethlehem. The townspeople haven't seen her in over a decade. They run out to meet her, excited, saying, "Is this Naomi?"
Which is a heartbreaking question, because Naomi means pleasant.
And she looks at them and rejects their comfort entirely. She says, "Do not call me Naomi, call me Mara."
Mara means bitter.
She publicly, loudly states that the Almighty has dealt very bitterly with her. She says, "I went away full, and the Lord has brought me back empty."
She doesn't sugarcoat her trauma with pious platitudes. She doesn't say, well, God is good all the time. Everything happens for a reason.
She is devastated. She places the blame for her suffering squarely at the feet of God. She feels abandoned.
And from a pastoral perspective, what is truly remarkable is what the text doesn't do in response to her anger.
Right. God does not strike her down with a lightning bolt for complaining. The narrator doesn't interject to condemn her lack of faith.
Exactly. The text just sits with her in the darkness. It is very reminiscent of the Book of Job. It affirms that honest lament, anger, and theological confusion are legitimate, necessary components of a mature faith.
And this brings up a massive warning that scholars point out regarding how we use the concept of providence when dealing with suffering people. There is a huge danger in offering premature comfort.
This is a crucial takeaway for anyone wanting to help a grieving friend. Providence, the idea that God is orchestrating events for a good purpose, is almost always retrospective.
You can't see it in the moment.
It is incredibly difficult to read in real time. At the end of chapter 1, when Naomi is weeping, calling herself bitter, and convinced her life is over, she could not possibly foresee the brilliant legal victory at the city gate, or the child she would be holding in chapter 4.
So if someone came up to her in chapter 1, patted her on the back, and said, "Don't cry, Naomi. God has a hidden plan. Just wait and see," that wouldn't be comforting. It would be insulting.
It would be deeply alienating and hurtful. The doctrine of providence is misapplied when it is used as a weapon to shut down someone's grief.
It is a balm for reflection later on, when the picture is clearer, not a preliminary intervention for raw trauma.
You cannot fast forward someone's healing process by demanding they see the grand design while they are still bleeding.
If you've ever experienced real grief, you know exactly what this feels like. It's like trying to explain the brilliant plot resolution of a complex movie to someone while they are stuck living inside a terrifying, chaotic scene.
They can't hear you over the noise of their own pain.
You can't fast forward their trauma. But what the text does show us is that God's shoulders are broad enough to carry our anger and our accusations while we wait for the resolution. He doesn't demand fake politeness from us.
And crucially, while we wait for that resolution, we are not called to passivity. The Book of Ruth corrects the fatalistic assumption that trusting God means doing nothing.
The synergy of action.
Yes. The synergy of action is paramount. Ruth didn't sit in her house waiting for bread to fall from heaven. She went out and dangerously gleaned in the hot sun.
Naomi didn't wait for a husband to appear. She planned a risky intervention at the threshing floor.
Boaz didn't wait for the legal issues to resolve themselves. He actively manipulated the proceedings at the city gate. Faith in providence is an active verb.
God routinely accomplishes his extraordinary will through the ordinary obedience of people simply going to work, protecting the vulnerable, and acting ethically.
Exactly.
Those active, painful steps in the dark. Those seemingly mundane legal maneuverings at a dusty city gate. Those small choices to share a handful of roasted grain. They eventually rippled out to change the entire world.
It did.
Which brings us to the stunning conclusion of this deep dive. How does this story of three ordinary people wrap up?
The narrative concludes with a wedding and then the birth of a child, Obed. The women of the village, the same ones who greeted Naomi when she was bitter, now surround her in joy.
They proclaim to Naomi that Obed shall be to her a restorer of life and a nourisher of her old age.
And this is where we see the theological scope of the book widen dramatically. The scholar Daniel Block, among others, argues that Obed functions as a typological foreshadowing of the Messiah.
Let's unpack that term for our listeners. What is typological foreshadowing? What is a type in ancient literature?
In biblical literature, a type is a person, an event, or an institution that serves as a historical pattern or a prophetic blueprint for something greater that will come later.
It's a way for ancient writers to show that history isn't random. It moves in deliberate, echoing patterns.
So Obed is a type. He is a child born miraculously from emptiness, elevated by the community, and hailed as a restorer of life and a redeemer of a broken family. He establishes the pattern for the ultimate restorer of life.
And Boaz himself acts as a type too, right?
Yes, Boaz is the ultimate Goel, the Kinsman-Redeemer. He perfectly prefigures the work of Christ. Think about the requirements Boaz met. He possessed the legal right of kinship. He had the vast resources required to pay the redemption price. And most importantly, he had the willing desire to sacrifice his own estate and his own comfort to bring a marginalized, impoverished foreigner into his family.
For Christian readers, this text points directly toward a Christ who takes on human flesh to become kin, pays the ultimate price, and brings the outsider into the eternal covenant.
And the book makes this connection explicit at the very end with the genealogy. The story doesn't end with, and they lived happily ever after. It ends with a list of names.
It traces the family line from Perez down to King David. And historians note the incredible explicit link to Judah and Tamar from Genesis 38.
Yes, the villagers explicitly bless Ruth by comparing her to Tamar. If you know the story in Genesis 38, Tamar was another foreign woman whose Israelite husband died.
Her father-in-law, Judah, refused to give her his younger son in levirate marriage.
So Tamar took drastic, unconventional, and legally dubious action, disguising herself to sleep with Judah to force him to fulfill his covenant obligation and secure the endangered family line.
It's incredible. The villagers are basically saying, we see what you did, Ruth. You forced the men of this tribe to honor their covenant, just like our founding mother Tamar did.
Exactly. It reviews that the ultimate purpose of this localized, intimate drama in Bethlehem was cosmic in scope. While Naomi and Ruth were just trying to find enough grain to survive Tuesday, God was silently preparing the throne for King David.
And eventually, this lineage echoes all the way into the New Testament. If you open the Gospel of Matthew to the very first chapter, the very first verses, you find a genealogy of Jesus.
And right there in the list, breaking all the patriarchal norms of ancient genealogies, Ruth is explicitly named.
A penniless Moabite widow from the darkest, most chaotic era of Israel's history, permanently woven into the tapestry of salvation history as a permanent testament to the inclusion of the Gentiles and the marginalized. It is breathtaking.
Truly breathtaking.
So what have we learned from pulling apart these 4 short chapters? We started today by talking about how history is usually viewed from the top down, shaped by grand, sweeping forces, epic kings, and clashing armies.
But the Book of Ruth flips the camera, shows us that the universe is not governed by random chance or the whims of warlords.
Behind the veil of the ordinary, behind the famine and the legal disputes, a magnificent tapestry of redemption is being woven. And it is woven not with swords, but through our small, gritty acts of Hesed.
It's all about those small acts.
As we wrap up this deep dive, I'm going to leave you with a final thought. The text shows us that divine protection and providence rarely look like a parting sea. They almost always manifest through the physical actions of ordinary people making difficult, ethical choices in chaotic times.
Yes.
As you go about your week, navigating your own messy, ordinary life, look at the people around you. Ask yourself, whose chance encounter are you supposed to be today? And whose shoulders are waiting for you to step up and spread your cloak of protection over them?